are two examples of quadratic expressions that I want to go ahead and simplify and then solve that follow a simple format of ax squared plus bx plus c, wherein a is equal to 1, so then I don't need to write it. And these involve negative numbers. So let's go ahead and focus on the first one. So it follows a is equal to 1. So remember the rule from last time. When a is equal to 1, I need to find two numbers that times to give me c and add to give me b, c and b. In this case, I need to find two numbers that times to give me 30, because c is 30, and add to give me b, which in this case is negative 11. Not just 11, but negative 11. Okay? Well, because a is equal to 1, the first thing I do is just simplify it into two brackets multiplied by each other and make x my first value in each bracket. Because when I open it up, x times x will give me x squared, so I don't need to worry about any numbers being attached to the x's. Now I need to focus on what these two values might be. So I come here and I focus on my multiplication, because anything plus anything can give me minus 11. But less values can times by each other to give me 30, which is why I need to focus on my multiplication. But let's just take a step back for a minute and have a look at our numbers. Positive 30 and negative 11. Well, in this situation, where one of the numbers is positive and one of them is negative, I need to figure out what kind of numbers I'm expecting. Well, since I'm adding two numbers and getting a minus, and timesing two numbers and getting a positive, I know that both my values have to be negative. And this is because a negative times a negative gives me a positive. The only other combination that will give me a positive is a positive times a positive. But if I were to add a positive and a positive, I'd get a positive, right? 2 plus 4 gives me 6. But this is not a positive number. So two positives being times together is ruled out. So because I'm adding two numbers and it gives me a minus, but I'm timesing those minus numbers and giving me a positive, it must be two negative numbers. It can't be one positive and one negative, because while adding a positive and a negative could give me a negative number, timesing them would give me a negative number, and I'm looking for positive 30, not negative 30. So that's how I figure out what kind of numbers I'm expecting. I'm expecting two negative values for these brackets here. So the first thing I think of for my 30 could be minus 1 times minus 30. But minus 1 times minus 30 gives me 30, but minus 1 plus minus 30, which is basically minus 1 minus 30, gives me minus 31, which is so far away from minus 11, so it's not those two combinations of numbers. What's the next combination I could take? Well, I could do minus 2 times minus 15, which gives me 30, but minus 2 plus minus 15 gives me minus 17, which is closer to minus 11, but still not there. So I am getting closer. What's the next pair of numbers I can use? Minus 3 times minus 10. Well, that gives me 30, but once again, adding them does not give me minus 11. And so the next pair of whole numbers that I can use that evenly go into 30 is minus 5 and minus 6, which gives me 30. And minus 5 plus minus 6 gives me 5 plus 6 is 11. Minus 5 minus 6 is minus 11. So that gives me my two numbers that I want. So one of my values is positive 30, and the other is negative 11. sorry, one of my numbers is -5, and one of my numbers is -6. And once again, it does not matter which way I was to write this. These two brackets are equivalent to each other because there's a multiplication sign here. So a times b is the same as b times a. It doesn't really matter which way you write it. So if my question was to simply simplify, that would be it for now, and that would be my answer. But if I was to solve it, I would add in the extra step of equaling it to 0, because that is what solving means, equaling this expression to 0. Well, now I pretend that this is a and this is b, and I let a equal 0, so I cover that up. So x minus 6 equals 0. And therefore x has to be, carry the -6 the other side, so I change the sign, becomes +6. So x is equal to 6. That's my first answer. Now I do let b equal 0, because a times 0, where b is 0, also gives me 0. So I cover up b. So x minus 5 gives me 0. X minus 5 is equal to 0. So x must be equal to 5. Carry the -5 over, it becomes positive. So those are my two answers, x equals 6 and x equals 5. Okay? Well, now, very important, I would check my answer by expanding this out using the FOIL method. First, outside, inside, last. So my first values are x times x, which is x squared. My outside values are x and -6. X times -6 is -6x. My inside values are -5 and x, so -5 times x is -5x. And my last values in each bracket are -5 and -6. Timesing a minus and a minus gives me a positive, so be very careful with your signs. And 5 times 6 gives me 30. Now I can add up my like terms, so that gives me x squared minus 6 minus 5x gives me minus 11x plus 30. And is that what I started out with? Yep, right over there. So that is my answer, and that is correct. So this is the second example, and this is also following our simple pattern of ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is equal to 1, so I don't need to write it. So I use my rule. When a is equal to 1, I need two values that times to give me c, and two values that add to give me b. So in this case, c is -8, so not just 8, but -8. Sorry. Gives me -8. And add to give me b, which in this case is -2, not just 2, but -2. And because a is equal to 1, the first thing I do is just simplify it into two brackets and make x my first value in each bracket. So when I times out, it gives me x squared. Now I need to find out what values are in my brackets and fill them up. So I focus on my multiplication. And first of all, I take a step back. There are negatives involved. So I have both numbers that I want to find out as negative. Well, I'm timesing two numbers to give me a negative. So the only possible combination of numbers that can give me a negative when I times them is a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive, which gives me a negative. Either way, one number in here has to be positive and one has to be negative. They can't both be positive because a positive times a positive gives me a positive, and -8 is not a positive, and a negative times a negative also gives me a positive, and 8 is not a negative. So I am looking for a positive number and a negative number. So what can times to give me -8? Well, 1 and minus 8 can times to give me minus 8. But 1 plus minus 8, which is basically just 1 minus 8, gives me minus 7, not minus 2. So that's wrong. The next set of values I can use is minus 2 and 4. Minus 2 times 4 gives me minus 8. And minus 2 plus 4 gives me 2. Well, now here my answer is the same. The value is the same too, but it's got the wrong sign. I've got a positive here. But they're both 2. So what I need to do here is swap the signs over here. So the negative 2 becomes a positive and the plus 4 becomes a negative. So 2 minus 4 gives me minus 2. And 2 times negative 4 still gives me minus 8. So now I've found my two numbers. 8 minus 8, sorry. My two values are 2 and minus 4. So now I put that into my brackets. So plus 2 and minus 4. Once again, it doesn't matter which way is which. And for simplification purposes, that would be my answer. It would be over. Then I would expand it to check. But since I want to solve it, I add in the extra step of equaling it to 0. So I pretend that this is A and this is B, and I say let A equal 0. So that's now 0, there's nothing there, so I cover it up. X minus 4 equals 0. So X is 4. Carrying over the minus 4, I have to change the sign, it becomes positive. So that's my first answer. And now let B equal 0. So cover that up, there's nothing there. X plus 2 equals 0. So X is equal to minus 2. So those are my two answers. X is equal to 4 and X is equal to minus 2. And now I would expand this out just to check that what I've done is right. So I use my FOIL method. So first outside, inside, last. My first values are x times x, which is x squared. My outside values are x times minus 4. So timesing a positive and a negative gives me a minus, so minus 4x. 2 times x is plus 2x. And 2 times minus 4 is minus 8. So now I add my like terms together. X squared minus 4x plus 2x is minus 2x. And minus 8. Is that what I started out with? Yep. So my simplification, and therefore my answer, must be right.